All right, everybody, the recording is started. You can move forward with starting the meeting. It's 9:06.
All right, we good to go?
Yes.
All right, apologies for the delay. So this is the November 3rd Weston Board of Education Communications Committee meeting, being called to order at 9:06 a.m. We have a quorum present. Yep. All right, so first order of business is the approval of the October 2023 meeting minutes. Chad, I don't believe we were at that meeting, so I think it's really for Sharon and I took a look at them. They look good. I don't know if you had a chance, Sharon.
I did. June did an outstanding job again. Thank you, June.
All right. So then, Sharon, can I get a motion to approve them?
Yes, I so move.
All right. I second it. Excellent. All right. So then the next item of business is kind of a continuation of a conversation we started a couple of meetings ago. And the spirit of that conversation was, how does the Board of Ed take public comment? How do we process public comment and try and create some parameters in which the public could understand what the purpose of public comment is? And then we as Board of Ed members, how we can make sure that when people make public comment, they know that they're being heard and they know it's going to be acted on. And so Chad, this was a conversation actually I started about 2 years ago when I joined the Board of Ed. I think that we have made a lot of progress on improving communication, certainly with social media, publishing our meeting times, recording our meetings, our committee meetings, which, as I understood it, at least 2 years ago, we were not obligated to record committee meetings. That was something we started to do, record them and publish them. So it's good to keep moving the conversation forward.
Actually, hold on. Can I interject for 2 seconds? Were we not, Dan, perhaps you know, although you started about then too, were we not recording the committee meetings before? My understanding is that we were, it's just we weren't obligated to. So it's not like it's new that we're recording the committee meetings, because the committee meetings used to take place in person prior to COVID and they would record them. But it's just that after COVID started, we started doing them all remotely, obviously, and that my understanding is that they've always been recorded. I guess I just wanted to throw that out there for the public record.
I think they were. I have to go back and look. I know Board of Ed meetings were always live streamed because we've always had the setup. I don't know about subcommittee meetings offhand. I think you're onto something though, Sharon.
Okay.
I can get back.
I just wanted to put that in the record, but I agree with you, David. So continue.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Well, just for clarification, next time we meet, let's just make sure that I understood that the meetings were streamed. If they were not, I understood the meetings that when we were in person, people could call in, but the meetings weren't being recorded for viewing later. Jody, do you happen to know? Otherwise, we can table it and at our next meeting.
Before my time, I'm not really sure. My understanding, I believe, is that you could call in, or you could come to the meeting and sit along the side. You couldn't sit at the table. And then once we went remote, we started recording them and live streaming, and people could sit in remotely.
Okay. All right. So next meeting, if we could just close the loop on what we were doing before, either which way, I think we can all agree we've made improvements based on feedback. And that's the goal of this committee. So Chad offered to sort of take on some additional improvements that we could be making for public comment. And Chad was kind enough to sort of put together the first set of bullet items we spoke about. I think it was 2 or 3 meetings ago. And then Chad has since put together today's items. So I don't know if Chad, if you want to take it over from here.
Yeah,
and,
sure. I'll jump in. Everybody, is my mic on? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So the first thing that I would say about this is I think that if we adopt something like this, and it's an if, that it should be very clear about what the parameters are and why we're doing it. Meaning, I think it's a good idea to sort of shift and throw out a bunch of the reasons why public comment does have pretty strict guidelines for how to avoid every single meeting being a complete free-for-all and things like that. So the purpose with this is to give very concrete ways in which we could, in a methodical way, give some type of responsiveness, but not necessarily an answer on things if there's not an answer that can be given appropriately or in a timely fashion. So that's why to have this very specific sort of four-step approach. Number one is the boilerplate language that we would read before each public comment session. Now, I just shared a draft of that last time around, which was pretty straightforward. I then trimmed some of it out of it, but it's essentially like, you could boil it down to: do not misinterpret a lack of response for a lack of receipt. Because one of the mystifying things, of course, at public comment is how you say something and then nothing ever gets shared back. But just having that initial introduction for the public about how public comment works, I think can be powerful, because very often you might have people who are attending for the first time. The second step would be that if it's easy and accurate to do in the moment, then the administration could have, and this is the key part of the language, encouraged delegation, but not obligated, non-binding. Meaning, if it's very clear that it's a question about facilities, it's very clear it's a question about curriculum, things like that, the administration could choose in the moment or at the end of public comment, perhaps to say, comment one, that's a facilities issue, et cetera, et cetera. Or an important point in this would be, if the thing they're asking about is in that meeting's agenda later in the meeting, they could simply also say, well, by about 8:30 tonight, we'll probably be into that section. The third category would be that we all would have email signatures. And I think the email signature can be literally simple as what I just said, which is like, the Board of Ed reads all the emails we receive. Do not misinterpret lack of response for lack of receipt. Because I don't think we can promise to respond to every single email or to get back to every email. But I think we do need to let people know that it doesn't just go into a cyber vacuum. And then the last thing will be the trickiest to work out, because this, I think, has the most room to go off the rails. But contemplating at each subsequent meeting, and it might be in the actual public comment section or just after, if there are updates to give about previous public comment sessions, that there would be a sort of standard moment in the next meeting at which items that might have come up in public comment that can be spoken about would be addressed in the following meeting's public comment. Now, hopefully those sound specific enough that you see the intention here would be to have very clear parameters about how any sort of responsiveness within public comment could work. And perhaps I'll stop there, because I think that's probably enough detail to give on those four of those before we go any further. So any questions, reactions, concerns, thoughts, ideas?
I do have a thought. Well, we've talked a little bit about the boilerplate, and I kind of took a swipe at tweaking it around that I'm happy to share with you guys later. But I do have a thought about the email signature. Mm-hmm. Here's my thought on it. We're talking about how the email signature would basically lay out, just because we haven't responded doesn't mean you're not heard. But in order for them to receive an email signature, we'll have responded. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess that's a question for Jessica, which is, does that constitute any kind of it wouldn't constitute, I don't think, any kind of convening of a meeting, because it's just a piece of, well, actually, Dan, why am I talking? What do you think, Dan? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking that through. The signature is, you're now going to have to reply to somebody, right? So that could potentially open up a whole can of worms, even if you just hit reply just for your signature, right?
Yeah.
The other option is like an auto responder, vacation and out of office reply that could say something like, thank you for your email, blah, blah, blah. But my also recommendation is, that could also be read as part of the boilerplate language. Be read before each session. And I think that may be one of the personally, whatever you guys determine should be said, like what you're basically saying, like, we acknowledge receipt of this. Can that be, I don't know if putting it in email or as an out of office responder makes the most amount of sense.
Yeah.
Because that's automatic. Like, you can't pick and choose who gets that out of office reply. So no matter what even if you're emailing me and I respond back, that's going to be your automatic reply to me.
Yeah, right.
You know what I'm saying? So what I'm concerned with that is then people who tend to receive the same email over and over and over again, they then start to ignore content of actual emails.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
That's a really good point, because like on the one hand, to read out the bullet plate at the meeting live doesn't really help, because some people might not attend the meeting and they might,
Exactly.
we're trying to show his responsiveness via email. But at the same time though, you're making a really good point about gumming up the works, which is if every time we send an email to anyone, confirming a time, if it's as a vacation responder, we're going to like triple the number of emails that go back and forth, which weirdly could actually maybe be counterproductive, and that we might miss more emails and therefore do a worse job communicating. I never thought of that.
you have to think about it this way, right? So let's say Jody sends you the agenda or the calendar invite, right? Even just a calendar invite for a Board of Ed meeting, she's automatically going to get an autoresponder. And then let's say one day you embed, you write an email back. Saying, you know what? Unfortunately, I won't be here. But Jody's and Jody, don't take offense to this, but Jody's so used to getting your autoresponder that she just simply ignores your reply. She's going to miss an email from you that actually has like meat and potatoes to it.
Right.
I think autoresponder is I don't think that that's necessarily the way to go. But again, I reiterate the fact that if it's an email signature, it's going to be based upon the fact that we are now responding. And that was basically, think about what our workshop over the summer with Jessica, in which it was discussed, do we respond? Do we not respond? How do we respond? As a board member, but not as the voice of the board, because remember, only Steve can really respond as the voice of the board. So it muddies the water if we're all responding separately. We can respond and say, as a parent, I hear you, but as a board member, I can't respond.
Let's, just for clarification, so a couple of things, and I think Chad, you were on the board at the time. You definitely were on the board at the time. So I understand that the chair speaks as the board. Is that by Board of Ed policy, or is that based on past practice?
I think that's law and policy, both.
Okay, so
do we know? I mean, we were dealing with the lawyers to do this. It wasn't necessarily practice. It was that we are a board and we are individuals on the board. Remember, we are only acting as a board when we are sitting around that table. If we're not sitting around that table, then we cannot speak on behalf of the other board members. Only Steve can speak on behalf of the other board members, or on behalf of all of us.
Okay, so are you saying that's law or that's past practice? Because a conversation took place, I believe, Chad, you were on the board, about during COVID and the masking and when we were going to return to campus. And we received a lot of emails from parents, and I believe in general, the board was considered slow at responding to parents, and it could have been the influx of emails. It could have been a lot of other things. And I believe Chad and I had a conversation about helping out Tony at the time.
Let me just interrupt. I was definitely not there, because I was never on the board when Tony was.
He started on the board just as the security issue came up. That was one of your first meetings.
I've been on the board roughly a year. So Tony was, I came in the same time Steve did. I was never on the board with Tony. Go ahead.
So basically, the conversation went along the lines that the response from the Board of Ed as a board was slow, and people were not getting responses to their emails. And then the question came up whether or not we should be sending out a generic email that we received as a board, that we received your email, and the chair is the person who is charged with responding, or whether the chair wanted to appoint somebody else within the Board of Ed who had the bandwidth at the time to start doing the responses. And it may not have been COVID related. For some reason, again, I could be wrong, I thought it was you, Chad, because
it was, but I think you're just confusing which issue it was about, because I think it was all circling the safety conversation we had last year. So much of what you're saying, yes, but you're 6 months.
The spirit's the same. The spirit of the question, the discussion right now is is the chair speaking for the board process, or is it in state statute, or is it in the BOE policy? Because giving people a response to their email, even if it's not 100% substantive, just the received, we understand, and this will be processed through or at or by. When we receive emails based on past practice, the vast majority of us receive an email and we do nothing with it. And we just wait until we're CC'd on a response from the chair or no response at all. We don't do anything as 6 other, or at least 5 other members to acknowledge that email. So I think it's important to find out for our next meeting whether or not the responsibility is by state statute or by Board of Ed policy limited to the chair, or can somebody who has bandwidth or has ability at the time for bigger issues where you see an influx of communication be able to say, I will go ahead and let these people know we've received the email and it will be looked at by, or it'll be reviewed at, or it will be delegated to.
So I think that that's basically what you're saying is we need to reach out to the lawyers and find out whether or not that's something that legally will put us into a pickle.
Yeah, I think so, because past process and law or state statute and policy is different. Past practice, rather, I should say.
I think that my take on it was that Jessica was pretty clear this summer that we were not to speak out of turn, and it didn't have to do with, well, you know, I don't know, you guys as a board, if you want to decide that, you can go ahead and do that. That was never part of the conversation. So my interpretation of that is that it is something that's mandated by the state and by law. But let's get clarification on it. No harm.
If I can suggest, I would invite Jessica to the next meeting.
Yep.
Of this committee, Lisa?
Mhm.
Yeah.
She attends subcommittee meetings when necessary
Sure.
in neighboring districts, so invite her.
Good.
Right. So that's certainly, if we start kind of creating an ongoing list, that's certainly one thing we should ask Jessica. Right? All right. So I think if we jump around, but I think on the email piece, I think the spirit of the email piece is, my experience is members of the public do email us based on past practice, which we're going to find out at the next meeting, whether or not past practice is simply past practice or if it's the rule of the land, so to speak. We, the other 5 Board of Ed members, don't respond. Well, we've learned that the chair and the vice chair talk on a regular basis, and they split the responsibilities of responding. I saw an email just the other day where Steve referenced, I believe, Melissa looking into something or responding on behalf of an email we received. So I think it's fair to say that that responsibility is divided among the chair and the vice chair. So
The responsibility to speak on behalf of the board?
well, no, I don't know about that, but that the
Right.
vice chair and the chair do speak on topics in reference to emails that we receive. And it appears to me that the task to respond is delegated between the 2 of them.
Well, if I can add some clarity around that also, I meet with the chair and the vice chair every week,
Right.
about half an hour. We also work together to set the agenda, certainly taking input from anyone on the board for the Board of Ed. And if, for example, there is a topic that has been expressed by the public, like when there were public comments with safety and things like that, we certainly made sure to add it to the next Board of Ed agenda.
Right.
So that's it.
Yeah, I think that what you're talking about, David, is it's in reference to Lisa, what she just said, her meeting with Melissa and Steve. Is it weekly that you do that, Melissa or Lisa, that you meet with the
Weekly,
chair and the
board
co-chair?
chair and the vice chair meet,
Yeah.
yes.
So
about half
it
an
was
hour.
during her weekly meeting in which
Mhm.
Steve said, basically, Melissa and I discussed this with Lisa Barbiero. So I don't necessarily know if that changes in any way, shape, or form the manner of response or anything. I'm not quite sure. where you're going with
And
it.
just so you know, generally during those meetings, I will say, like I said this week, that anybody that had a concern that sends me an email, I pick up the phone.
Sure.
And there were some concerns, obviously, about the world situation. And I pick up the phone. I probably made how many calls, Jody? I think the last one was a message, 7 calls yesterday. You know, because I think that that's frankly my responsibility to address.
Let me bring a little structure to this, if it's okay. I'll try to anyway. So it sounds actually as though the point with number 3 would be, can we implement a consistent practice for email responsiveness? And I'm saying it as an if, because it may not actually be that we can. I'll give you some examples why. The signature might just be administratively a mess. Similarly, we don't necessarily want to have it as an autoresponder. Those two things might be ruled out. David, you bringing up that Melissa and Steve, based on what happens in those meetings, perhaps do respond, I actually think is a step in the right direction. And I've only been here for a year, but I do think that email responsiveness has gotten better. I do. At least from it's a sample set of 12 months, so I don't know. But I think the latter 6 months that I've been here, since the first 6 months, we have done a better job of responding to people, more emails, and in a slightly faster manner. And by we, I'm saying typically that's the chair doing that at this point. At least the communication that I'm seeing. So it may be that we are not able to settle on anything more rigorous than it is a norm or a guiding principle of the board to try to be as communicative as possible. That's sort of like a value that we hold. We may not be able to get down to an exact, like, this is what our email best practices are, maybe. But I actually think that if Melissa and Steve are sort of delegating those duties back and forth, that's good. That's a step in the right direction, because the first order of business is just to make sure that if there is a subject that really is important to the community member, that they get the sense that whether or not we could ever give them positive resolution about the thing, because we can't always, but regardless of if we can or cannot, that they're getting some kind of acknowledgement that we're in communication with them. So I think that would actually be a positive.
I think, Chad, 2 seconds. I think that the acknowledgement is super important. We've all agreed that acknowledgement is important. But again, I don't see how the chair and the co-chair, I think that David is taking this from the response that Steve had the other day to a parent who is concerned about setting the graduation date. And in his response, he happened to mention, oh, Melissa and I discussed that with Superintendent Barbiero. She will follow up with you. So I don't necessarily take that as we are sharing this responsibility. He was just saying this conversation was had today with Ms. Barbiero, and here's who was in the conversation. So I'm not sure that necessarily implies that they are sharing the communication responsibility of it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think a lot of it's going to come back to what Jess has to say. Either it's the chair or it's not.
So we invite her in the meeting. That's a good.
All right. So let's just close out the topic of email. I think the spirit of the topic of email is that at present, and this is a question for the two of you, at present, when a member of the community sends an email to the Board of Education, which includes all 7 of us, generally through past practice, whether we're going to find out from Jessica what the base of the past practice is, we don't respond.
No, wait, let me jump in. I can at least speak for myself on this. I have changed before. My first 6 months, I was like, I don't know. I don't think we're supposed to necessarily on every email. So I wanted to stay aside, because you're supposed to speak, as a unified board if you're going to respond to something. So I didn't really respond. But since like the safety conversation, basically what I typically do is if I think it's an email that needs to be addressed pretty urgently, I will ping or nudge Steve, or once in a while I'll ping or nudge the administration, like, I think we should handle this. So I'm doing at least that much in terms of it. And I do think that, and I'll just say it by name because he's the chair. I don't know why I wouldn't. I think Steve has been more responsive in the last 6 months than he was the first portion of the year. I don't know about, previous practices. I can just speak to the year that I've been here. So I think we could be better, but I do think that it's changed. It's shifted in a positive direction.
And I think,
but are you responding directly to the sender?
No, I'm not.
That's what I'm referring to.
So, but David, in the past, we had.
Let me just finish real quick. So,
Sorry.
but I think previously there was not, and that, going back to when I had brought some of these issues to light about the sort of security conversation, I think previously we were slower or even absent. And I think that so long as we are either the chair or the vice chair or the administration, or even the chair to say like, this is the administration thing, we pass it along to administration, responds, I think we're doing our job. And I think the goal should be to do a little more of that if we can't lock it into a rigorous, this is the step-by-step process that happens for every email, which we may not be able to. Sorry, Sharon, I cut you off.
No, I understand what you're saying there, David. Thanks, Chad. In the past, there have been times where individual board members have responded. But what you need to clarify in your response to the individual is that you are not responding as a member of the Board of Education. You're responding as an individual, because you are not, unless you're sitting at that table. Remember, Jessica was very clear about that this summer. Unless you're sitting at that table, you are not speaking as a Board of Education representative. So you can go back to them with your Board of Ed email and you can say, gosh, you know what? I saw this email the other day. I can't speak on behalf of the board, but as a parent, I can tell you that that is upsetting to me. And, you know, and I'm trying to do whatever I can. But again, I am one of 7 board members, you know, so you have to be very careful with that communication. She discouraged us from communicating on our own completely, just primarily because of what would happen.
But you can't do that on your board email. You can't write any of what you just said on your board email.
That's true, I guess, because it's foilable.
You can't, like, you know, I think that the thing was said, if you want to reach out to the person on your own email, but it's still foilable and all that stuff.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I think we need
just-
clarification.
I think so
because
too.
I think that the goal here, there's 2 goals. Number one, every person in the community that sends an email to the Board of Education has an expectation of a response.
Mhm.
And we are 7 members trying to represent 2,000 plus kids and 7,000 plus people in town. So, or I guess 10,000 plus people in town. So I think what we should do also when we talk to Jessica is find out if we can have a template that similar to the rules of engagement for public comment. When someone sends an email to us as a group, we can send back a reply that has been saved sort of as a draft or a template that says, wanted to let you know, as a Board of Ed member, I received your email. The process is X.
Mm-hmm.
And then the person who sends the email, number one, receives a response that it's been received. And number two is they know what the process for a response is. So I think that could be the solution to acknowledging.
Yeah, I mean, let's check that idea with, I at least think that's an interesting idea, and we could talk to Jessica about that.
I think it's an interesting idea, but now let's take it forward a little bit. So somebody sends an email to the entire board and they basically are, you know, whatever they're upset about or whatever they want to talk about. Now they're going to get 6 basically identical emails back.
No, I'm sorry, let me jump in. I wasn't interpreting, David, that you're suggesting that any of the 7 of us, so long as we use this template, can write back. I think that we should clarify that. Either it's,
what I'm talking about, well, what I'm referring to is that when you send, I think I've used this example before. If you, Sharon, or you, Chad, or anybody else in the group here sends an email to a company, their customer service address.
Yeah.
You are looking for some sort of response. Even if the response is, hey, Chad, I'm sorry the product didn't work as you expected. I'm going to forward this to whatever department.
Yeah, I agree. I like your idea. So just to clarify, to Sharon's point, she's saying if all 7 of us have the sort of the freedom to do that, you could potentially get 7. I'm just asking, is that what you're describing? I think it has some potential. Would that just come from either the chair or the vice chair?
But that's adding an extra step in there.
No, I think if someone can choose, so if we have the outline of how public comment works and how emails are processed out in the public, right? And the Board of Ed says the state statute, the Weston Public Schools bylaws state, if you email the Board of Ed, the only person who is going to respond to you is the chair. If people understand that, then I think one or two things are going to happen. When they send an email, they're going to know, even though they emailed all 7 of us, the only person who's going to respond is the chair. And therefore the silence from the other 6 members is not that we didn't receive your email. That's just the process. But hang on a second.
you know, here's a simple suggestion for what it's worth. Everybody gets an email. Whoever opens it first has the language and just reply all and send it back.
Right. Well, right. And I think so,
and that's
right.
it.
Right. And what's the worst that happens though? If somebody if the process is out in the public that the chair is the only person who can respond to emails, and someone still emails the entire 7 members of the Board of Ed, and all 7 of us reply with the same template, what that would tell me if I were that community member who sent the email, it's acknowledgement that all 7 people who I sent it to received it.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is you act as a unified board, right? So one person sending a response, replying all, whoever gets it first with the boilerplate language seems to be it. I mean, if I send an email, I don't think I need 7 separate emails saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. It comes off as
Respond and
being
say, thank
insincere.
you, this is the process. The board chair will be in touch if people are anxious to at least be responsive. I mean,
Yeah.
and then end it.
And let me jump into, I just have a quick question about that. I think, so I like this idea where this is going right now. I'm just thinking about from a technology perspective, right? Obviously, I like to automate everything. It doesn't seem like it's going to be possible here. But I think if you step on top of this, would it be easier to just, what if, another what if is, what if one board member gets an email from a member of the public? Does the board member now reply and include all of the board members and say we are in receipt of, this is for informational purposes only. I think that has to start it off so we know it's not a quorum, right?
Mhm.
As a reply, and then say, thank you for your email, whatever, you guys put the verbiage in there. So I
Yeah.
think is it a policy that needs to get put in now to discuss this? Or I think we just need a concrete and not that I think everyone's saying we need a fast and loose solution, but should it be one person who should be responsible? Or I'm just thinking of all right, somebody says let's say David gets it first and is like, no, I got it, I'm going to send a reply all. But then at the same time, Chad's like, I got it, I'm going to send a reply all. So now they do get 2.
And I think right. I think the solution to that problem is, first, we have to understand the parameters. And I understand what Jessica said during the retreat. And I think it's a little bit, we need clarification. I think it's a little bit unusual that Jessica suggested to us to email outside of our Weston Public Schools email address, because I don't care to have my personal email
That's about
voided.
I don't recall her saying that, to be honest.
Well, she did. She said if you're going to communicate, you should you should not be using your Weston Public Schools email address. So, for example, if a parent sends an email, let's back up for a moment. Let's just get clarification, because she did make a statement not to use our Weston Public Schools email address. Let's find out from her in what scenario is she suggesting that, because it does open up a can of worms that now I have to maintain my own ability to have my personal email FOIA'd.
Yeah,
I don't want to get into
I want to jump in. I remember this conversation.
Yeah.
And it was, I think she was alluding to the fact that if you replied in your personal email, not as a Board of Ed member, taking your Board of Ed member hat off and just as a taxpayer, that was maybe what she was alluding to. I could be wrong, but I feel like that was part of the conversation of using your personal email as a response, again, not as an elected official.
But the only problem with that, though, is that you would not have been privy to that email had you not had your Board of Ed email address.
It's muddy waters. And from my perspective, I always have FOIA on the back of my mind. I would never recommend anybody ever using personal email ever, because selfishly, you make my life even more miserable with FOIA. Now I have to ask you for your personal emails.
Aren't we closer to a good idea here than it seems? Meaning it seems like we're settling around. I think Lisa's suggestion of boilerplate language that starts off, to your point, Dan, with 4 informational purposes that outlines what the expectation is. And then we just do the logistical, martial arts activity of figuring out, does it make the most sense to have that boilerplate that whoever gets the thing first could reply back, or there's one person who does it? I think that's a pretty elegant solution. Boilerplate for informational purposes, as Lisa was saying, we send it out, we figure out, to Dan's point, what is the most efficient way to do that? Is that first receiver and then we all see that? Or is it one person who's delegated with that activity. I think we're close.
I would lean more towards first receiver, primarily because we are all busy and we all have, like, there are times where I'm laser focused only Board of Ed, and then there are other times where I'm on the other side of the country or in Europe. Like,
All right,
we have to. So
yeah,
first,
let's table this because I think we have some other items to cover relative to it. So we can come back to this.
So if I can just make sure, we're going to reach out to Jessica to get her here at the next meeting.
yes,
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think to stay on topic, I think unless I heard otherwise, there's pretty much three. It really centers around asking her to clarify. She's said twice now, because Lisa, we did have a brief call. I would expect it was during a communication meeting. I happen to remember exactly where I was in a parking lot. We had a brief call with Lisa previously that I was on, and maybe it was just a call that
Jessica?
I'm sorry, Jessica, I'm sorry. I'm using Lisa's name to kind of jog Lisa's memory.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay. All right. So let's
I
just.
think we just get her here and go through it.
Okay. All right. All right. So we got to get clarification on when we're supposed to be using our personal email, or rephrase it.
if
Why or when she said don't use your Weston email address, because I think we need clarification on that. She did say that. 2, whether it's past practice that the chair speaks for the board, or if it's state statute or in our policies. And 3, if we want to move to a model where people, the 7 Board of Ed members, receive an email, and we want to acknowledge that email and let the person know what the process is, who should that person be? And I am not suggesting it be divvied up, maybe on an annual basis. It is somebody who schedule complements the chair, somebody who has more free time or is on email on a regular basis, and that person can be a backup. And maybe it's the vice chair. I don't know, but we can, if Jessica says the concept of appointing somebody of the 7 members to do the initial response, that person then uses the template that's approved to let the person who sends the email know it's been received and what happens next. Because I think that's what we're after.
Just because I know that lawyers bill in 6-minute increments of time, and I want to save as much money as possible, I actually don't think we even need to get clarification numbers 1 and 2. Here's why. Whether or not we can email on our personal email, it sounds to me like a colossally bad idea for all the reasons we're already talking about. So I'm not sure we need clarification on that.
But she said that twice now.
Well, do you want
Said what twice
do
now?
you want your personal email foilable? I mean, like, even if she says that you could do that, is that something that you're going to want to invite into your life? Is FOIA requests going into your personal email?
No. Well, the only issue I have is no, I'm not set up to have my email FOIA. The Weston Public Schools email system is set up for FOIA.
Exactly. So my point is, I don't know if we need to waste our money getting counsel, like gray area counsel from her, if we know, like, just don't do it because it makes your life real bad. So that's my question. Like, or if you want to clarify that last. Let's get on to point number 3. And point 2, regardless of what past precedent or law is about the chair, what we're really trying to find out is, like, what can we do right now to increase responsiveness to the public? So I think we start with number 3, which is, this is our best idea. For informational purposes, boilerplate email that goes out. Who sends it out? First receiver or one person, to your point, who's like assigned for the year or whatever without obligation? I think we start there.
All right. So with that, just so we can kind of move through a couple of the other items that were on the bulleted list, I think, unless you disagree, I think the next item that's probably of most conversation and segues well with the purpose of responding to email is bullet item number 4. A new section of public comment at each meeting where the Board of Ed addresses any resolution or next steps from previous meetings' public comment sessions. I think that addresses the concern that I've had, which is that folks come and they make public comment. It's written down, but generally speaking, we as a board and the community who attended the meeting or virtually watched the meeting never hears what came out of that public comment. So I think what Chad is suggesting, and I'll throw it back to you, Chad, is that when we get public comment, at the next meeting, we acknowledge that so-and-so made this public comment and it was referred to facilities. It was referred to the building administration. It was whatever the case may be. So I don't know if I queued it up correctly, Chad, but if you could.
I think that's precisely it. And I always like to try to pressure test these things a little bit with real world circumstances. So what was guiding me a bit on these 4 things was the safety conversation from last year. And Lisa, I don't know if you remember this or not, but I thought you did a great job jumping in after 2 meetings and sort of grabbing the bull by the horns and naming, these are the things that we're considering doing. And these are the things we're looking at. And this is why we can't necessarily reveal all of them right now, but this is what you can expect. And that's a simple task that I think had we done 1 meeting earlier, if to the extent that we could have, and the board is saying that, public comment received, this is what's in the works, stay tuned. It's not going to be a short answer necessarily because it takes some time to get things in place. I think that would have helped a lot, because I happen to think we did a really good job with that situation. We authorized funding pretty quickly, actually. Those changes were put into place over the summer. I know that some of the parents with the biggest concerns actually were taken on tours of spaces this fall and were pretty encouraged by what they saw. We took the expert input of the law enforcement specialists in our community. And Lisa, again, I've only given this compliment to you like 5 times, but I think it's a good model, partly through conversations that, were brought to my attention. We got 2 community members who help put in place practices that can bring down the total number of different factors that could be threats to safety. One is safe storage and the other is threat assessment. We didn't tell the public any of that, really. And had we said, this is what's in the works, I think that would have gone a long way to helping people experience like, okay, my concerns are not falling on deaf ears. So that's the spirit of this point. Now, the only thing I will say is I think numbers 2 and 4, those 2 bullets, they're a bit aspirational. And I don't think we can necessarily say like every piece of public comment, the next meeting, we will give you an update. I think we have to aspire to that, but some public comment we probably can't. But I do think that that should be the goal, is that this is what came up in public comment last time. This is what's in the works about it. If this is an issue that's important to you, stay tuned. And perhaps it's even addressed later in the meeting, and that means agenda or down the road. Okay, I'll stop talking. I think I'm now becoming slightly repetitive. So that's the spirit of that comment, or the topic number 4.
I mean, that's how I understood the topic as well.
Yep.
And I think it addresses the concern that the description that has been used, that during public comment, we generally sit there like a bump on a log. And there are, in certain scenarios, there's a reason for that, which also segues, and I'm not suggesting we move yet to that, but bullet item number 1. It's basically, if when people make public comment, we let them know ahead of time why there are going to be topics they bring up that are going to require follow-up through a full board meeting. That would be part of the acknowledgement at the next meeting. So for example, someone brought, I think what you're saying is, let's say, again, this is 100% hypothetical because I've 100% hypothetical. Someone brings up a book that was banned. And they say, I understand which I believe is true. I use this as an example. Death of a Salesman was banned. And I'd like to know why. At the moment they bring up that public comment, we are, as a board, are not prepared to discuss it. But at the next Board of Ed meeting, it would either show up as an agenda item, or it would at least show up as a follow-up to the public comment, such as we had a comment last time we met. It was about the removal of Death of a Salesman. Curriculum committee is looking into it, and next month we will have a follow-up conversation, for example. I think that doesn't take a lot of effort on our part, and I think it helps the public know that when they make public comment, there is a process. It doesn't just go into a vacuum that we never revisit.
Is there any way, I'm thinking about this, is there any way in which making this a part of a meeting could backfire and have a negative implication?
I don't know why. I often hear public comment negative. We have to make public comment positive within the parameters of what we're allowed to do. Public comment should never be viewed as negative.
David, you're misinterpreting what I'm saying here. Don't try to twist my words. I'm not saying public comment is negative. What I am saying is if we put this on a monthly calendar, is there any, I'm asking everyone to think ahead here. Is there any instance in which this could be a negative for the board and something that we would want to avoid?
I think that that's why I was saying, I think that it should be goals that we aspire to, not ironclad rules that we have to fulfill. Because there are, I mean, yeah, sure. Can you imagine, like, if there's a person who has, like, I don't know, an axe, let's make up something that has nothing to do with the Board of Ed, and they have an axe to grind about some issue, and they want to come back to it every single meeting, then no, we probably shouldn't have as a mandated rule that every single time that comment comes up, we have to speak about it. But I think aspirationally, I think in general, not only would this be good for the public, I think it would give us an opportunity to make sure that we're doing as good a job as possible. I think going back to the security concern, I think I think that would have helped us. So, but I do think that this gets really messy quickly if we're not very narrow in terms of what we carve out of the guidelines for each of these four. And I think numbers 2 and 4 would be like when possible or if possible, that sort of language. And yeah,
I guess the reason what you said is correct. There are going to be, somebody's always got an axe to grind somewhere, right? And that's okay. I mean, we live in a large community and we have a variety of different people who think different ways. But if we are addressing some public comment, but not other public comment, then that's going to come back quite possibly to bite us in the rear, saying that we're cherry picking what we respond to. And that could be a negative for the board as well.
Yeah, that's a risk.
So that was one of the thoughts that I had.
I think we've discussed some of this though. So for example, somebody comes in with something more substantive, such as why was Death of a Salesman removed from the curriculum?
Was it, by the way? Can we, is
I
it
don't
possible
know.
to clarify
Lisa,
that now or not?
Do you know that, Lisa?
Maybe we're going rogue. Maybe we
Or,
should
yeah,
clarify
you know
that.
what?
No, I believe I am 99% sure it was. It's a question that I brought up at one of my early curriculum committee meetings because I was shocked to hear it.
All right. Well,
Well,
let's.
I wouldn't comment on that at all because it could have been
It's not
replaced
part of the
by
agenda.
another text. There's
Yeah.
only so many we can do.
Yeah.
There's
Mhm.
been a lot of
Thank you.
new literature introduced, so.
I withdraw the question. You're right. It's not on the agenda.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, okay, what we're referring to though is an example of somebody who's asking about a book that was removed from curriculum versus somebody who may say the bathrooms are in disrepair, right? It's if during public comment those two things came up, the question of why a book was removed from the curriculum would require more in-depth knowledge than we would have at that meeting. We're just not prepared at that meeting. There's a process, right? But if somebody says that, my daughter came home yesterday and said that there's no way to close the door on the stall in the bathroom, and this really concerns me, this goes back to one of the items, Chad, that you brought up, which is at that point, why wouldn't we simply say to the parent, that is a facility, thank you for bringing that to our attention. That's a facilities issue, and we'll refer it to facilities.
Yeah, I think on the balance, I think it has more potential to be a positive thing than a negative, but I don't think that I do think there's gray area, and you're right, it could be a situation in which it shows, to your point, Sharon, it risks showing, favoritism or like asymmetry in how we respond to things or whatever. But I also think that there's more upside, at least in my opinion. Seems like there's more upside than downside.
There's one thing I want to point out.
Yeah.
That when somebody brings something up in public comment and then you can't respond, there's a reason also why you can't respond. It's against FOIA. You can't enter into a discussion on something that is not posted on an agenda. So if someone brings up, for example, the crisis in the world today and says something, and then you engage in a discussion about it at a board meeting, you are in violation of FOIA. That agenda item was not posted.
Even
So
if the
it's-
discussion is we're going to be forwarding it to someone, correct?
Well, no, that's different. I'm saying
Okay,
that
sorry.
that's the reason why boards of education do not discuss in the moment certain topics also. It's a violation of FOIA.
Mm.
It has to be noticed. Someone might say, gee, I wish I could have listened to that particular item and I had no idea it was on the agenda. Oh, well, someone brought it up, so we decided to talk about it. You got to be very, very careful with that.
Lisa,
The other thing is
go ahead.
when there's big issues,
Mhm.
and that's, what happens at our weekly meetings with the chair and the vice chair, like with the whole safety thing. We weren't even in a position to make a comment, but it was very clear because again, FOIA, it was very clear that it was a hot issue. So what did we do? We immediately made sure it got on the agenda at the next meeting.
Yeah, Lisa, I mean, I think your point is well taken. And I don't know if we could say everything with absolute consensus here, but I don't think any of us think it's a good idea to, in the moment, respond to each.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's not only good, it's not, you can't do it. Because it's in violation of
Thank you. It's not the right
FOIA, and
attitude.
you have to
Good. You can't actually do
I
it.
think that we have to be very careful though, Chad, because one of the points that you made was, perhaps suggesting a delegation at the meeting. That borders on a response.
No, but hold on a minute. Because this is something that I think Chad brought up previously.
Hey, wait,
So-
David, just so you know, I do have to stop immediately at the hour mark. So just so you know, if all of a sudden I disappear, no offense to anybody, but I have a client that I have to start right at 10 o'clock. So please, David, continue. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
all right. So we'll close out this part of the conversation because this is obviously a bigger topic and one that requires the right amount of time to get it right. We understand the parameters such as if an item is not on the agenda and we're not prepared to discuss it, that's a perfectly reasonable response. So it's perfectly reasonable to say to somebody who makes a public comment, that's something that requires really some thought and a discussion, and it's not on the agenda. And therefore, thank you. We will add it to the next agenda.
Yeah.
So that is not going to get us into trouble. That's not a conversation. That's acknowledging the public comment. And I just I'm sort of hearing a little bit of the fear of not getting it 100% is paralyzing us from making any positive changes.
Well, I think also Lisa's point that actually could be added into the boilerplate quite seamlessly,
Exactly.
which is I had never actually quite thought of that one reason, which is if it's not on the agenda, if someone wants to learn about death of a salesman as an example, and then all of a sudden after the fact they find out the meeting happened, they didn't know about it, it wasn't on the agenda. I think that's a totally valid thing to put into the boilerplate. In general, David, I agree with you. Like, we don't want to let the perfect be in the way of the good on this. I think we do have some good ideas about this. One, for the boilerplate. Two, for items 2 and 4, but with provisions that they're like optional. It's values, it's goals, it's not mandates. And then I don't know yet what to think about. I think item 3 made a lot of progress as well, which is probably boilerplate email, probably the responsibility of one person, but we've not yet identified is that one person first receiver, someone besides the chair who's delegated to do that for a period of time, or shared duties between the chair and the vice chair. So I know we're partway through, but I think we're making some progress in each of these 4.
Can I just add one thing? Because I think if you leave, then there's not a quorum and we can't continue.
Yeah.
But there's one thing I want to add here is that just as
Well,
procedural.
there's 2 of us.
We're still a quorum.
If 2, there's no, oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, people. I got to run a business too. You know how it goes. Lisa, go ahead, please.
Any changes or any things that you are proposing, remember, would have to go because it relates to bylaws and things like that, has to go to the policy committee. That probably would take about 2 meetings. Then it would have to go to the full board to be voted on, a minimum of 2 meetings.
Right.
So I'm just mentioning that because when you look at the timing, you're out a minimum of 3 months here, just to kind of frame it.
4. Yeah.
It could be, yeah. But
And that's
the
if
process.
we had something to pass on today.
Right,
So,
Lisa, so if the parameter email that Chad's referring to, which is really informative, right? I mean, it's not, I believe what we would be doing is getting clarification on existing policy, state statute, and law. If we were to draft some sort of template that was read so that the community understood how public comment works with the intent to improve public comment, would that be a policy change, or are we just at this?
if you're going to say something like, we don't respond, we don't respond to email, things like that. But if you say, we hear you, and at the next meeting, we will be addressing it under based on what your comments are, yeah, that's a bylaw change. It would have to go to policy. It has to be drafted. When you start changing the structure by which we operate, it's a bylaw, so it would have to go through that process.
Okay, so so if we went to a procedure or a process where public comment was made in our September meeting, and there were items that we wanted to acknowledge in the October meeting. So, for example, Dan DeVito brought to our attention a public comment about a problem with the bathroom, or a book that was removed from the curriculum. And this is where we're at with it. The facilities took care of the bathroom. Curriculum committee has it on the agenda. Just by the act of referring to a previous meeting and the action that took place at that would rise to the level of a bylaw change?
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying that within a comment that you read that this is the new practice, yeah.
Yeah, if it's a practice of the meeting, it has to go through the bylaws.
Now, that being said, because you're talking about, months to follow that process. In the meantime, what I think that what can continue to happen is when people make a comment, you can say, thanks, we can't respond, right? Because it's a violation of FOIA. Then at the weekly meeting, the chair and the vice chair need to review that with the superintendent and see, because there are also things that happen on a next month's agenda that it will be addressed, like just naturally. Like, let's say it was something with the bathrooms and somebody brought it up in November or December. In January, it's going to be part of the budget presentation with the capital thing. So there's some things that naturally will happen, but then it has to be discussed, like, okay, in the meantime, or we get this sorted out with the bylaws, we can think that this warrants adding it to the agenda.
And the thing is going to be tricky is if we put this in policy, if we're trying to create a brand new policy around this, that we address last month's public comment in this month's meeting. Again, the wording has to be specific, because that's what policies are, is specific. Or not, I don't know. It's going to be really tricky. And as far as if someone has brought up something in public comment that we are not addressing, then that could be used against us. And I want to be careful with that.
All right.
I know you're saying the perfect is outweighing the good. And I hear what you're saying. I just want to make sure that we're covered, because we've got some very vocal people in town who, if I say him instead of her, they're going to jump all over me. If I say it instead of what or whatever, they're going to be all over me. So, or all over all of us. So I just want to make sure that as we move forward, we're communicating with people, of course, but we're doing it in a way that is, bulletproof.
All right. So just to recap, because I feel like I'm not entirely clear.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to institute what Chad had described, which is when someone makes a public comment, if we can't it sounds like there's even pushback on the basics of, if somebody makes public comment and they say the stall in X school and Y bathroom doesn't properly latch, and we brought it to the principal's attention, and my daughter or my son reported today, it's still a problem. And we, at the time of the public comment, say to the parent, this is the question. So at the time of the public comment, we have the ability to say to the parent, that's a facilities issue. Jody, who takes the notes on behalf of the superintendent, she wrote it down. We will forward this to facilities. Is there any issue with that? Just to kind of take it one very small piece.
I think we need to have Jessica here, because what you're doing is you're changing the practice of now anytime anyone asks a question, and remember, you are an entire board. It's not one individual that delegates to administrative staff to respond, that it's a bigger issue. Okay, here are the 5 things these people are asking. We're going to delegate to these 5 administrators to find the answers out about a bathroom, or about, a hole in the playground equipment, or I don't know. I'm just putting examples out. Yeah, that's a change in practice. And there are bylaws that specifically say how some of these things are handled. So before we go down a road of not even having that based on our past practice, we do have to look at it. So again, I would advise the next thing we need to do is have Jessica at the meeting. Jody, if you can see Jessica's availability of the dates, and we might have to tweak the date based on her availability, but we need to have her at the meeting.
And I also think we have to be careful, David, because it could be misconstrued that our delegating it to the responsible party within the school system is acting as a response to public comment. So we have to be really careful with that, because we can't respond to public comment. That's
Public comment is just that. It is for somebody to stand up and speak. There
Right.
is no back and forth during public comment.
right. And we could say in the beginning, before you make your comments, we will follow up with you, when possible, after the meeting, or something along those. We can bake that into that boilerplate thing that we read, but we can't I think we have to be very careful about making specific comments on public comment.
I mean, I would advise you say a boilerplate that you can't respond in wides against FOIA
Exactly.
until this gets sorted out with Jessica and the bylaws. But in the meantime, again,
Well,
I would
we-
tell you that
We can't change. We can't do any of that as of right now.
I pick up the phone and talk to them a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, making a formal thing at a board meeting about a bathroom, I don't know if that's the best use of the board's time.
Thank you.
But bigger issues that really warrant getting into, and giving us the time to prepare and present and things like that, of course.
Yeah, okay, and then, so obviously, we're going to defer to Jessica. Jessica's an attorney, and so we have to understand what is illegal and what is, or not allowed, and what is past practice. And I've said that a bunch of times, because we want to, I think, improve where we can the way we interact with the community, and just to give the community a sense that we're not bumps on a log, except for in the areas we have to be, and define those areas. All right. Well, obviously this is something that we all care about, because we spent the better part of an hour working on it. And this is, I think, the second or third time we're talking about it. So it sounds like, with that said, at our next meeting, we'll see if Jessica is available. And I think, if Jessica's available, and I think that we should just make sure that we are going into it with the right intent, which is to improve the way we do public comment. If Jessica says you're doing everything by the books and there's no place that you can really make changes, then it is what it is, right? Let's not get into the expense of even having her come for an hour. So maybe that's.
I think it's worth her coming. I mean, if it makes you feel any better, there are neighboring communities that have her at many subcommittee meetings on a regular basis. So
Yeah.
I would support her coming.
Okay. All right. So then
David,
on our
I have a quick question though, David, because you're talking about the interactivity and how to make public comment better. And I happened to see that you had made a comment on social media about this committee meeting today, in which you were basically saying an interactive conversation is always great. And that kind of perplexed me a little bit, because unless you've spoken to Jessica, and I don't think you have based upon our conversation today, that's a little misleading that you're saying that we are meant to be having interactive conversations during public comment. So I'm not quite sure why you threw that out there like that.
I believe you're taking out of context this meeting today. I had posted on social media that we generally don't take public comment during committee meetings.
Correct. And then I told you that we do take public comment. And then you came back on social media and posted something along the lines of, great, we have public comment, and interactive conversation is the way to go, or something along those lines. So, and that's not, I think that that's misleading. I don't think that that's honest, because we do not have interactive public comment. We've never had interactive public comment.
I think you're taking out of context what I said. I provided my Weston Public Schools email address, and I posted a link to this meeting today.
Correct.
I was not, nor did I say that we're going to have public interactive comment at standard regular Board of Ed meetings. What I did was I invited people to email me with their thoughts on how we can improve public comment. and I invited people to attend this meeting today. And if anybody at this meeting today wanted to speak, they would have an opportunity to speak, and I would be able to say it's not a regular Board of Ed meeting, and I would be able to, as chair, ask them to clarify if they felt we should be doing something differently. So I was speaking about the ability for them to email me ideas, and if they came to this meeting and they wanted to speak, to be heard.
Right. So the way that I read this this post was you basically said, "Great, we can have public comment," and in the public comment, you had originally put down, you said public comment is allowed and nothing beats an interactive conversation. So here's a link to our meeting, which I will post on other Facebook groups as well. Link to the meeting, link to the agenda. So that, again, David, I think that that's misleading, and there seems to be. I think that we are exceptionally transparent. This is all being recorded. Whoever is here right now is listening to it. Whoever wants to watch this in the future can watch it. There is no lack of transparency with this board. As a matter of fact, we're just trying to be extra careful so that we are not doing anything that would hide anything and that we would be accused of having a lack of transparency. So I'm not quite sure why you as a board member are posting things like this on public, on social media, saying nothing beats an interactive conversation, when you know that we are not able to respond to comments during public comment. Even you as the chair of this committee can't say to somebody, can you clarify what your comment was? So I'm not quite sure why you're posting it. I guess I think it's super important that we as a board stick together, and rather than try to create or bake some sort of scenario in which we are not being transparent, I think we need to, acknowledge that we are all working for the public here. We're working for the public good. And there is no secret cabal. We are all being transparent, and making comments like that takes that away. It makes it seem as if we're hiding things. And I just, as a fellow board member, I don't appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't know why you're personally attacking me. You sent me a text message. I don't think this is the forum for you and I to air our grievances. So I will simply leave it as chair of this committee. This is not the right forum to air a grievance that you may have with me. And to further clarify, the intent, which I think is very clear, was if members of the community wanted to have input at today's meeting, they could email me suggestions. And if they wanted to attend the meeting and they wanted to speak, they would be invited or allowed to do so.
But that's public comment. That's not interactive conversation.
Okay, again, I don't know why you're attacking me on this.
David, I feel as if you've been attacking the board, and I think it's only fair that, this is a communications meeting. This is where this is meant to be discussed. If we're talking about public comment, this is where it should be discussed.
Okay.
So I'm not making this a personal.
If I may, I think we need to agree on a couple of things. There can be public comment at subcommittee meetings and Board of Ed committee meetings. People can publicly comment.
That was the text I sent.
And we can invite people to come to meetings and make their comments. And the other thing I think we can agree on is that we can't discuss what they're commenting about if it's not related to the agenda, because it has to be FOIA-able. That's a violation of FOIA. So I think beyond that, I think that maybe now, with all due respect, is a good time to end the meeting, to get Jessica to the next meeting and move forward.
All right. Works for me.
All right, I make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
All right, 10:14 a.m. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Hey,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you.